A man crawled out of the Montana wilderness after 11 days alone, no GPS, no emergency beacon, no store-bought gear, and the only thing that kept him alive were skills his grandfather taught him behind a woodshed in 1962. The year was 1973. His name was Dale Hutchins. A hunting trip gone wrong. A broken leg. 42 miles from the nearest road. And every single technique that saved his life? Today, at least 6 of them will get you arrested, fined, or flagged by federal land management agencies as illegal activity. Here's what the survival industry, a $2 billion machine selling you freeze-dried pouches and carbon fiber fire starters, doesn't want you to know. Number 15 on this list involves a plant your great-grandmother grew in her garden that FEMA now classifies as a controlled agricultural species. Number 7 involves a fire-starting method that the U.S. Forest Service quietly banned in 1986, not because it was dangerous, but because it threatened equipment sales contracts worth millions. And number 1? Number 1 is the mindset they cannot sell you, cannot regulate away, and cannot replace. The one thing standing between survival and surrender. The Bureau of Land Management. The FDA. Monsanto's lobbying arm. They buried these skills one regulation at a time. Let us count them down. Number 15, reading the land like a map. Before compasses were cheap and GPS was everywhere, your grandfather didn't navigate by device. He navigated by terrain. Depression-era trappers and frontier scouts read watersheds the way you read road signs. The direction of valley drains. The side of a ridge where snow melts last. The way game trails always lead to water within 2 miles. This was called terrain association, and it was taught to every rural boy by age 12. Modern wilderness survival courses have stripped it out. Why? Because it requires no equipment. And no equipment means no sales. The $400 GPS watch sponsors the YouTube channel. The dead man's terrain knowledge does not. One sentence to carry: water flows downhill, and animals always know where it goes. Number 14, the debris hut. No tent. No sleeping bag. Just the forest floor. Appalachian homesteaders built debris huts in under an hour, a ribbed frame of fallen branches packed tight with dry leaves, bark, and pine needles. The insulating layer needed to be arm's length deep on all sides. Body heat did the rest. Tested in modern survival research at the University of Vermont in 2019, a properly constructed debris hut maintains interior temperatures 40 degrees warmer than ambient air. In a 20-degree night, that's the margin between hypothermia and morning. The Forest Service now restricts debris construction in designated wilderness areas as vegetation disturbance. You can build a fire. You cannot disturb leaves. Remember that next time someone tells you the regulations are about safety. Number 13, smoking meat without a smokehouse. The smell of hickory and salt. That's what survival smelled like in 1931. During the Depression, families in the Ozarks and Appalachian foothills preserved entire deer carcasses using greenwood smoke and nothing else. No refrigeration. No sodium nitrate. No USDA inspection stamp. They cut the meat thin. They kept the fire smoldering, never blazing. They understood that it was the combination of low heat, smoke compounds, and reduced moisture that created preservation, not a single magic ingredient. The FDA's 1970 Good Manufacturing Practice regulations effectively made this method illegal for any commercial application. Backyard practitioners were left alone for a while. Today, in 7 states, smoking wild game for sharing or trade without a licensed facility will earn you a misdemeanor. Your great-grandmother fed 40 people through a winter with this method. Today that makes her a criminal. Before we get to number 10 and the trapping technique that 3 states have now specifically named in updated wildlife code, I need to show you something about who actually wrote those regulations. Between 1965 and 1995, the outdoor equipment industry grew from a regional cottage trade into a $28 billion global market. That growth didn't happen by accident. It happened because traditional self-reliance skills, the ones passed down orally, behind barns, on hunting trips, in kitchens, were systematically replaced by purchased alternatives. Lobbying groups funded by major outfitters pushed wilderness regulations that criminalized improvised gear. The 1964 Wilderness Act, sold to the public as conservation, contained provisions that effectively banned dozens of primitive practices on federal land. Your grandfather's knowledge was not lost. It was replaced. Deliberately. Profitably. Keep that in mind as we continue counting down. Number 12. Primitive trapping. Figure 4 deadfalls. Paiute triggers. Twitch-up snares. These were not cruel novelties. They were engineering. Calculated leverage, counterweights, tension designed by indigenous peoples and adopted by frontier settlers over 3 centuries of trial and error. A skilled trapper in 1920 could feed a family of 6 on small game through an entire winter using nothing but cordage and wood from the forest floor. In 2024, 31 states require a trapping license for any primitive trap on public land. 11 states ban deadfall traps entirely as inhumane devices. The same states permit steeljaw leghole traps with a $12 license because the trap manufacturers have a lobbying budget and your grandfather's knowledge does not. Number 11. Acorn flower. Here's something most survival channels will never tell you, because it requires patience they can't monetize. A single white oak tree can drop 20,000 acorns in a season. Processed correctly, that's enough caloric flour to sustain a family for months. Cherokee and Muskogee peoples perfected leaching, submerging cracked acorns in cold running water for 3 to 7 days to remove bitter tannins, then grinding the meal on flat stone. Frontier families adopted this by the 1700s. During the Civil War, it was a documented Confederate survival staple. The USDA today classifies acorn flour as an unregulated food product, which sounds permissive until you realize it means no store will carry it, no school will teach it, and your children have never once held an acorn and understood what it represents. Number 10. Fire from friction. Not romantic. Not theatrical. Necessary. The bow drill method, a carved hearthboard, a straight spindle, a notch cut at exactly 30 degrees, was used by virtually every indigenous culture on Earth. It was standard knowledge for American homesteaders through the early 1900s. Your grandfather's generation was the last to learn it as a practical skill rather than a campfire party trick. Here is the part that should make you angry. In 1986, the U.S. Forest Service issued guidance classifying friction fire in several high-risk zones as a prohibited ignition method during fire season. Not matches. Not lighters. Friction fire. The method requiring the most skill, the most knowledge, and producing the most localized, controllable ember in all of primitive technology. Meanwhile, disposable lighter sales were unregulated, untaxed, and climbing. The skill takes 3 hours to learn. The lighter takes 3 seconds to buy. One of those options builds a dependency. You know which one they chose. Number 9. Wild medicinal foraging. Your great-grandmother didn't call it herbalism. She called it knowing. Plantain for infected wounds. Yarrow to stop bleeding in the field. Elderberry prepared correctly against respiratory illness. Black walnut hull is a powerful antiparasitic that Appalachian families used for generations before pharmaceutical dewormers existed. A 2021 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed antimicrobial properties in 73% of the most commonly used Appalachian medicinal plants. The science caught up to the knowledge. It always does. The FDA's 1994 Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act didn't expand access to herbal knowledge. It captured it, forcing clinical language onto ancestral practice, and gradually making the act of recommending a plant for a specific medical use a federal offense without licensure. The plant didn't change. The law did. And the pharmaceutical industry wrote the law. Number 8. Natural water purification. Before iodine tablets. Before Life Straw. Before any of it. Frontier families purified water using charcoal, sand, and gravel layered in hollowed-out wood. They boiled what they couldn't filter. They read water sources by clarity, smell, and surrounding vegetation. They understood that water moving over limestone was safer than water pooling in clay bottom. This was functional chemistry with zero formal education. Modern wilderness regulations on many federal lands now prohibit the construction of improvised filtration systems as, and this is the actual language, unlicensed water treatment infrastructure. You can carry in a $60 filter. You cannot build one. The distinction is not safety. The distinction is commerce. Number 6 involves a navigation technique so precise that the U.S. military rediscovered it in 2017 and then classified the research. But first, Mabel Crowder was 67 years old in 1934. She lived alone on 40 acres of eastern Tennessee hill country after her husband died of black lung. No sons at home. No government assistance beyond a $4 monthly widow's stipend. She kept a root cellar stocked through technique alone. She never lost livestock to predators, because she understood animal behavior better than any textbook ever written. She foraged, smoked, preserved, trapped, and navigated not as hobbies, but as the complete vocabulary of staying alive. When a university extension agent visited her in 1938 documenting Depression-era agricultural practices, he wrote in his notes, "This woman possesses more applicable survival knowledge than any 10 trained men I have encountered in this work." Mabel never read a survival book. She never bought a piece of survival gear. She learned by watching. By doing. By failing safely under the guidance of people who had already failed before her. That transfer, that oral, physical, generational transfer is what we have lost. Not because the knowledge disappeared. Because we stopped sitting still long enough to receive it. Number 7. Pitch and pine resin fire starting. The longleaf pine once covered 90 million acres of the American South. Settlers called the resin-soaked heartwood fatwood, and it was the original fire-starting technology of the frontier. A chip of fatwood the size of your thumb would ignite in wet conditions, in wind, at altitude, with a single spark. Confederate soldiers carried it. Depression-era hunters swore by it. Your grandfather probably had a chunk of it in the shed without knowing what to call it. Here is where it gets infuriating. Longleaf pine was systematically replaced by faster-growing slash and loblolly varieties through USDA-sponsored reforestation programs beginning in the 1950s, programs heavily influenced by the pulp and timber industry, which preferred faster harvest cycles over the 150-year growth timeline of longleaf. Today, the longleaf pine covers less than 3% of its original range. The fatwood that once grew wild across the entire South is now a premium artisan product sold in boutique camping stores for $18 a bundle. They didn't ban the knowledge. They destroyed the raw material. Same result. Number 6. Celestial navigation by day. Everyone knows stars for nighttime navigation. Almost nobody knows the sun. Frontier scouts and native trackers used shadow stick navigation, a technique requiring only a straight stick, 2 stones, and 15 minutes. Plant the stick, mark the tip of its shadow, wait, mark again. The line between those 2 points runs true east to west. Every time. Every latitude. Every season. Accurate to within 2 degrees without a single piece of manufactured equipment. In 2017, the U.S. Navy quietly reintroduced celestial navigation to its officer training curriculum after acknowledging that GPS jamming and cyber attacks had created a critical vulnerability in fleet operations. That reintroduction included primitive solar techniques. The research behind that curriculum revision? Classified at the confidential level. The Pentagon rediscovered what your grandfather's generation took for granted. Number 5. Animal behavior as weather forecasting. Before barometers. Before satellites. Before the Weather Channel existed to be wrong at you in high definition. Farmers and frontier hunters read the sky through the animals living under it. Cattle turning their backs to the south-southwest and bunching together, pressure drop incoming within 6 hours. Certain bird species flying low and feeding aggressively, storm system within 12. Ants building their mounds steeper on the south face, cold winter coming. These weren't superstitions. They were pattern recognitions refined across 10,000 seasons of human observation. A 2016 study from the University of Exeter documented measurable, statistically significant correlations between animal behavioral patterns and incoming weather events, confirming what rural Americans knew by age 10 in 1910. The knowledge was dismissed as folklore by the same agricultural institutions now trying to patent the same research under grant-funded science. Your grandfather called it common sense. They're calling it a discovery. We're closing in on the top 3. And number 3, the one item on this list that a former USDA employee contacted us about after our last video, is unlike anything else we've covered today. Here's something that might push back against your assumptions. We talk a lot about what government agencies and corporations took from us. And the regulation is real. The lobbying is documented. The replacement of self-reliant knowledge with purchase dependency is not a conspiracy theory, it is corporate strategy written in annual reports. But here is the harder truth. We handed it over. Not all at once. Not because of a single law. We handed it over in 1,000 small moments of convenience. Every time a father said, "You'll never need to know that." Every time a school replaced a shop class with a computer lab. Every time we chose the $3 fire starter over the 20 minutes it takes to show a child what a bow drill actually does. The regulations accelerated the loss. But we opened the door. That responsibility belongs to us. And accepting it is the first step to reversing it. Number 4, the root cellar food system. Not just a hole in the ground. An entire microclimate management system. Depression-era families in the Midwest engineered root cellars with specific orientation, ventilation channels, drainage slopes, and humidity management using nothing but earth, stone, and memory passed down from grandparents who learned it from theirs. The correct temperature band, 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity, preserved root vegetables, cured meats, fermented goods, and winter squash for 8 to 10 months without a single watt of electricity. A properly managed root cellar replaced the refrigerator, the freezer, and the canning shelf simultaneously. Modern building codes in 43 states now classify root cellars as below-grade residential structures requiring permits, inspections, and in many municipalities, engineered drainage plans. The permit to preserve your own food the way your great-grandmother did costs more than the food you're trying to preserve. Number 3, herbal wound management. Listen carefully to this one. Before antibiotics, before penicillin existed in commercial form, American frontier families managed infected wounds with a combination of raw honey packing, yarrow and plantain poultices, and pine pitch ceiling that produced infection survival rates that modern physicians, when they examine the historical records, cannot fully explain. Not because the methods were magical. Because they worked. Raw honey, specifically unprocessed, local, varietal honey, contains hydrogen peroxide generating enzymes, a water activity level hostile to bacterial growth, and pH properties that inhibit both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. A 2011 study in the Journal of Wound Care confirmed that Manuka honey performed equal to or better than standard antibiotic dressings in chronic wound management. The FDA has approved exactly one honey-based wound product for clinical use. 1. After 40 years of research confirming what every Appalachian grandmother already knew. Here is what a former USDA plant regulatory officer who contacted us after our last video aired told us off the record. She said, "The documentation on traditional wound botanicals that crossed my desk in the 90s was suppressed not because it was ineffective. It was suppressed because it was unpatentable. You cannot patent a plant and leaf. You cannot own yarrow. The moment you cannot own it, the system has no mechanism to process it. Unpatentable. That is the word. Your great-grandmother's medicine chest was abandoned not because science disproved it, but because no corporation could put their name on it and charge you for it." Number 2. Constructed silence and situational awareness. This one has no equipment. No technique. No recipe. The best trackers, hunters, and wilderness survivors of the pre-industrial era shared one practice that modern survival culture almost never discusses. They cultivated deliberate stillness. Not meditation in the modern sense. Functional attention. The ability to stop moving, stop talking, stop thinking in words, and simply receive information from the environment. A skilled tracker in 1890 could identify what animals had passed through an area in the last 12 hours by sound, smell, soil compression, and the way light fell through disturbed vegetation. That skill required the ability to be completely present in a way that our constant stimulation environment has made nearly neurologically impossible. A 2022 study from Stanford's neuroscience department found that sustained periods of unprompted silence, no media, no conversation, no internal monologue, measurably increased spatial awareness and sensory processing in participants after just 3 days. 3 days. Your grandfather probably lived that way constantly. Not as a spiritual practice. As a survival requirement. Number 1. The doctrine of sufficiency. This is not a skill. It is a worldview. And it is the foundation underneath every single item on this list. Your great-grandparents did not think in terms of having enough gear. They thought in terms of being enough, being knowledgeable enough, resourceful enough, attentive enough to use what the land offered and their hands could make. The doctrine of sufficiency. It was not poverty. It was not deprivation. It was the deeply held belief that a human being in possession of knowledge, physical capability, and clear eyes needed very little else. This mindset is the thing the modern survival industry most desperately needs to destroy. Because if you believe you are sufficient, if you believe your grandfather's knowledge, applied with attention and patience, is genuinely enough to handle most of what nature throws at you, then you do not need the gear. You do not need the subscription. You do not need the sponsored kit. You need to learn. And learning has no profit margin. Dale Hutchins crawled out of that Montana wilderness in 1973 not because of what he carried. Because of what he knew. Because a man behind a woodshed in 1962 took the time to show him. That transfer of knowledge, grandfather to grandson, grandmother to granddaughter, neighbor to neighbor, stranger to stranger on a hunting trip, is the only thing standing between the living tradition of self-reliance and its complete corporate replacement.